My sister picked me up from Charlotte Douglas after 18 months in Qatar. She had something to tell me. She waited until we were on I-85 before she said it. Something's been built on your driveway. I mean on it, not near it, on it. I turned onto my street and saw it through the fence line. A steel frame shed, 12 feet wide, 16 feet deep, sit on a poured concrete pad that covered the full width of my private, recorded driveway easement, 30 feet of concrete between the road and my garage door. Inside, a 150 kilowatt commercial generator, utility connected, on vibration isolation mounts. On the front panel, a brushed aluminum plaque, Crestwood Ridge Community Association, Emergency Power Infrastructure, Phase 1, installed November 2024. I photographed everything that evening, the shed, the gas line, the electrical conduit zip-tied along my exterior wall. Wrong rating, wrong mounting, wrong application. The concrete pad's poured edge, sitting on top of my recorded easement boundary marker, my county survey pin, under her concrete. No building permit had been pulled, no electrical permit, no gas permit, no county record that any of it existed. I spent 20 years as an infrastructure engineer. I've worked in 4 countries on systems that kill people when they're built wrong. I knew exactly what I was looking at. I called my attorney. Quick question before we begin. Where are you tuning in from today? And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. The flight from Doha to Charlotte is 16 hours with the layover in Frankfurt. I had made the round trip 4 times in 18 months, twice going out, twice coming back on the week's leave Qatar LNG, built into long-term infrastructure contracts as a retention measure. Each time I landed at Charlotte Douglas, the city looked the same from the approach. The familiar skyline, the specific quality of Carolina light you stop noticing until you've been somewhere else for 6 months, and then suddenly it's there again through the oval window, and something in you settles. This time I was coming back for good. 18 months on the North Qatari coast, lead electrical systems engineer on a 400 megawatt LNG terminal expansion. The permitting, the grid integration, the standby generation architecture, the safety systems, the commissioning inspections. 20 years of that work, and I had gotten good at it in the specific way that comes from doing something long enough that you stop thinking about the individual steps and start thinking about the whole system. The way everything connects. The way a flaw in one component creates pressure on every component downstream. My sister Sylvia was at the arrivals gate with a coffee she'd bought me, and the expression she makes when she has something to tell me that she doesn't want to tell me. I have known that expression for 47 years. It has never preceded good news. I took the coffee. "What? Your house is fine," she said. "That's not how you open when everything is fine." She pulled onto I-85 northbound and let a mile go by. The Charlotte skyline falling behind us, the Piedmont foothills opening up ahead, the familiar 40-minute drive I had made 100 times. "Something's been built on your driveway," she said. I looked at her. "I mean on it," she said. "Not near it, on it." 114 Crestwood Drive sits on a corner lot at the northeast end of the Crestwood Ridge development, a 200-unit HOA community in the Piedmont foothills, Cabarrus County. I had bought the lot in 2018 specifically for 3 things: the corner positioning, the extra setback from the main road, and the private driveway easement recorded along the eastern property line. The easement gave me independent driveway access to my garage without crossing HOA common land. It was 32 feet wide, running from Crestwood Drive's eastern shoulder to my garage entry. It was recorded in the Cabarrus County deed. It had been mine since the day I closed, and in 6 years of ownership, it had never been anything other than my private driveway. I had been in Qatar for 18 months. Sylvia had been collecting my mail, walking the perimeter every few weeks, forwarding anything urgent. She had called me in late November, 4 months ago, to mention she'd seen some construction activity near the front of the property. Trucks, a concrete pour, some steel work. She had assumed it was the county doing utility upgrades on the road shoulder. She had not walked up for a closer look. I understood why, later. From Crestwood Drive at normal driving speed, the construction would have looked like road work. Trucks, equipment, a crew in vests. You don't stop and inspect county road work. You slow down and go around the cones. I saw it as Sylvia turned onto Crestwood Drive. A shed, a steel frame structure, 12 feet wide by 16 feet deep, sitting on a poured concrete pad that occupied the full width of my private driveway easement. The pad ran from the road edge to within 18 inches of my garage door, 30 feet of concrete where my driveway had been. The structure itself rose to approximately 10 feet at the ridge, steel frame with corrugated metal cladding, louvered ventilation panels on two sides. Through the louvers, the unmistakable housing of a large commercial standby generator, the kind of unit I had specified on industrial projects, a Generac commercial series, the housing alone the size of a compact car, sitting on vibration isolation mounts on the concrete pad inside the shed. A natural gas supply line ran from the street main into the shed's rear wall. An electrical conduit ran from the shed's distribution panel along the exterior of my property wall, zip-tied to the brick at intervals of roughly 4 feet, to a junction box mounted on my wall, and from there, underground, to the HOA's common electrical panel at the development's central utility node. On the shed's front panel, at eye level, a brushed aluminum plaque, Crestwood Ridge Community Association Emergency Power Infrastructure, Phase 1, installed November 2024. I said, "Stop the car." Sylvia stopped. I got out. I stood on the sidewalk and looked at it. I looked at my garage door, unreachable, the concrete pad blocking every approach line. I looked at the HOA plaque. I looked at the natural gas line. I looked at the electrical conduit running along my wall. I looked at the words, Phase 1. She had been planning more. I got back in the car. "Park on the street." "Marcus, it's fine," I said. "Park on the street." I had not parked on the street in front of my own house in the 6 years I had lived there. I called Diane Pruitt at 4:47 p.m. I knew who she was. 12 years as Crestwood Ridge HOA president, the kind of tenure that happens when a community is comfortable and no one wants the job badly enough to challenge the incumbent. In 6 years of ownership, I had interacted with the HOA 3 times. A fence replacement permit in 2020, a minor noise dispute in 2022, and the routine annual dues notices that I paid without incident. Diane had been a name on letterhead, a voice at 2 annual meetings I had attended and promptly forgotten. She answered on the second ring. I gave her my name and address and said, "There is a permanent structure on my private driveway easement. I need you to explain how it got there." Her response came in the measured cadence of someone who had anticipated this call and prepared for it. The November ice storms, she said, had exposed a critical infrastructure vulnerability. The development had lost power for 47 hours across 2 storm events, 200 households, the community center non-functional, the gate system down, the common area lighting out. The board had determined that a permanent standby generation system was a necessary community investment. The engineering assessment had identified the northeast corner lot, my lot, as the optimal placement point for the generation unit, closest proximity to the common electrical panel, best access geometry for service vehicles, most efficient conduit routing to the distribution nodes. She had attempted to contact me, she said. 2 email notices sent to my HOA registered address. I had been abroad for 18 months. There had been no response. The board had a community safety obligation and a professional engineering recommendation. They had proceeded. She delivered this without apology and without hesitation, in the tone of someone explaining a reasonable decision to someone who was being unreasonable about it. I waited until she was finished. "Ms. Pruitt," I said, "when was the building permit pulled?" A pause, the first break in her prepared cadence. "The contractor managed the permitting process. I'm asking for the date the permit was pulled. The Cabarrus County building permit for a permanent structure on a private recorded easement. When was it issued?" A longer pause. "I would need to check the project documentation." "Check it," I said. "I also want the full contractor file in my email by 9 a.m. tomorrow. Contractor name, license number, the signed contract, and the invoice. All of it." She said she would look into it. I ended the call. The light was failing by 5:30, but I had 90 minutes before it was gone, and I used all of it. I walked the full perimeter of the structure 3 times before I began photographing. The first pass to observe, the second to note, the third to sequence my documentation. The same site assessment methodology I use on infrastructure project visits. Systematic, reference to a fixed point, time-stamped and geotagged. What I photographed. The concrete pad, from 6 angles, including 2 shots that captured the county survey pin, the easement boundary marker, a steel pin and a small concrete collar, partially buried under the pad's poured edge. The pad had been placed with the boundary marker inside it. The recorded easement line was under concrete. The shed structure, all 4 elevations. The HOA plaque in close focus. The text, the installation date, the association name. The louvered panels and the generator housing visible through them. The natural gas inlet at the rear wall. The electrical conduit routing along my exterior wall. Standard gray, Schedule 40 PVC, not rated for exterior surface application in a climate with freeze-thaw cycling. Attached to my brick wall with plastic zip ties at approximately 48-inch intervals. Not in weatherproof conduit body. Not buried to the NEC required depth for direct burial. Routed across my property wall without a penetration permit. The natural gas line at the shed's rear entry point. I crouched and examined the fitting. No seismic automatic shutoff valve. Required by code for any gas appliance installation, where a shutoff cannot be manually reached within seconds. The line ran from the street main to the shed inlet, in a single continuous run with 1 manual shutoff at the street, approximately 40 feet from the unit. The generator housing clearance. I paced it, 18 inches from the face of my garage door. The National Fire Protection Association's NFPA 37 standard, which governs stationary combustion engine installations, requires a minimum of 5 feet of clearance from any building opening. My garage door is a building opening, 18 inches. The requirement is 60 inches. I had specified, inspected, and signed off on installations like this in Qatar, in Malaysia, in 3 U.S. Gulf Coast facilities, and on 2 domestic utility projects. I had written safety assessments on unpermitted electrical work in 2 contractor negligence cases where I had testified as an expert witness. I knew what compliant installation looked like. This was not it. By the time I finished photographing, I had 94 images. Every violation documented, every measurement recorded. The easement boundary marker under concrete, captured from 2 angles with a tape measure and frame. I went inside and called Priya Nair at 7 p.m. Priya was a property and construction law attorney in Charlotte. I had used her for the fence permit question in 2020, a straightforward matter she had resolved in 2 phone calls, and had kept her number in the specific way you keep the number of a professional who did their job cleanly and didn't overcharge you for it. She answered. I walked her through the situation in the sequence it mattered. The structure, the easement, the plaque, the installation date. The permit question Diane had not answered. She was quiet for a moment. Marcus, did she answer the permit question? She said the contractor managed the permitting process. That's not an answer. I know. Send me the photographs tonight. I'll pull the Cabarrus County building permit records first thing tomorrow morning. I looked out my kitchen window at the shed, the HOA plaque catching the last of the evening light. Priya, I said, I already know what you're going to find. Tell me. Nothing, I said. You're going to find nothing. Priya called me at 8:14 a.m. I was on my second coffee, sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open to the Cabarrus County online permit portal, the public-facing search interface that lets any citizen look up permit records by address. I had already run the search twice. I had already seen what the search returned. Nothing. Marcus. Her voice had the specific flatness of an attorney who has found exactly what she expected to find, and is not surprised, but is still, on some level, struck by it. I've pulled the full permit record for 114 Crestwood Drive. Building permits, electrical permits, mechanical permits, gas line permits, utility connection permits, every category the county tracks. And? Nothing. Not a single filing. Not a preliminary application, not a permit in progress, not a closed permit from a prior owner. Nothing related to this structure at any stage of the permitting process. I set down my coffee. The gas line connection, the electrical panel integration. Both unpermitted, a 150 kilowatt commercial generator on a natural gas supply line with no permit, no inspection, no county record that it exists. Connected to your neighborhood's common electrical panel, with no electrical permit and no utility integration filing. She paused. Marcus, I've been doing property and construction law for 19 years. I have seen unpermitted decks. unpermitted additions, unpermitted pools. I have not seen an unpermitted commercial generator installation on a recorded private easement with an HOA plaque on the front. The plaque is what gets me, I said. She put her name on it. She put the association's name on it, in brushed aluminum, mounted with 4 screws. A brief silence. I'm filing the legal notice today, Priya said. Formal demand for easement vacation, documentation of the encroachment, and notice of intent to pursue civil remedies. Before I file, do you want to give her one opportunity to respond? I thought about the call the previous evening, the prepared cadence, the absence of apology. The phrase, "the board had a community safety obligation," delivered in the tone of someone explaining a reasonable decision to an unreasonable person. File it, I said. I'll handle the technical side. I spent 2 days writing the engineering assessment, 4 pages, single-spaced, in the format I use for infrastructure project compliance reports, the format I had used for 20 years on installations in Qatar, Malaysia, and the U.S. Gulf Coast. Section headers, numbered findings, code citations, dimensional references, and a conclusion paragraph that stated the overall compliance status of the installation in plain language. I did not write it to be persuasive. I wrote it to be accurate. In my experience, accuracy is more persuasive than persuasion. Finding 1. Generator housing clearance. Non-compliant NFPA 37. Standard for the installation and use of stationary combustion engines and gas turbines. Section 4.1.3. Stationary generator installations require a minimum clearance of 5 feet from any building opening, including doors, windows, and ventilation openings. The installed generator housing is positioned at a measured distance of 18 inches from the face of the garage door, at 114 Crestwood Drive. The garage door is a building opening under NFPA 37. The installation fails the minimum clearance requirement by 54 inches, 90% below the required standard. The practical consequence? In the event of a fuel leak or generator compartment fire, the 18-inch gap between the housing and the garage door provides insufficient clearance to prevent fire propagation into the attached residential structure. The clearance requirement exists because this failure mode has killed people. Finding 2. Natural gas supply line, seismic shutoff. Absent NFPA 54, National Fuel Gas Code, Section 7.13, gas supply lines serving appliances in excess of 12,000 BTU per hour input must include an automatic seismic shutoff valve where the installation is within a seismic design category C or higher zone. Cabarrus County is within seismic design category C. The installed gas supply line serving the generator, which operates at approximately 1,400,000 BTU per hour input at full load, contains no automatic seismic shutoff valve. The line includes one manual shutoff at the street main, located approximately 40 feet from the appliance. In a seismic event sufficient to rupture the gas line between the street shutoff and the generator, the line would vent freely until manually closed. Finding 3. Electrical conduit, rated application non-compliant. NEC Article 352, rigid polyvinyl chloride conduit, Schedule 40. PVC conduit is not listed for use as a surface-mounted exterior raceway, in environments subject to physical damage or UV exposure exceeding standard installation parameters. The installed conduit is surface-mounted on an exterior masonry wall, attached with plastic cable ties, not listed conduit straps, at approximately 48-inch intervals, which exceeds the maximum 36-inch support spacing required by NEC Table 352.30b. The conduit is exposed to full weather cycling, UV radiation, and physical contact risk along a residential exterior wall. It is not rated for this application. Finding 4. Distribution panel wiring, unlicensed subcontractor. Based on documentation provided by Ridgeline, I had a name now. The contractor Diane had hired, a general contractor named Roy Callahan, operating as Callahan General Contracting in Cabarrus County. The electrical panel integration work had been performed by a subcontractor identified in Callahan's project file as B&T Electrical Services. A search of the North Carolina State Board of Examiners of Electrical Contractors license database returned no record of B&T Electrical Services holding a current or prior electrical contractor's license in North Carolina. The panel integration work connecting the generator's distribution panel to the Crestwood Ridge Common Electrical System had been performed by an unlicensed electrical contractor. Finding 5. Load calculation, not documented. Any electrical installation connecting a generation source to an existing distribution system requires a load calculation demonstrating that the existing panel and service entrance conductors can safely accommodate the additional load under the connection parameters. No load calculation documentation exists in Callahan's project file. No load calculation was submitted to the utility provider. The common panel integration was made without documented analysis of the panel's capacity to handle the generator's output under transfer switching conditions. Finding 6. Commissioning inspection, not performed. Commercial generator installations require a commissioning inspection, a documented functional test performed by a qualified engineer or certified technician, confirming that the unit operates within specified parameters, that all safety systems function correctly, and that the installation meets the manufacturer's commissioning requirements. No commissioning inspection record exists. The generator had been running, powering the development's gate system and common lighting, for 4 months without a commissioning inspection. Conclusion: the installation at 114 Crestwood Drive fails to meet minimum code requirements under NFPA 37, NFPA 54, and the National Electrical Code across 6 documented dimensions. The installation was performed without any county building, electrical, or mechanical permit. It was performed in part by an unlicensed electrical subcontractor. It has been operating for 4 months without a commissioning inspection. The installation presents active safety risks, specifically fire propagation risk from the clearance violation and uncontrolled gas release risk from the absent seismic shutoff, that are not theoretical. They are the documented failure modes that the cited code requirements were written to prevent. I signed the assessment with my professional credentials: Marcus Hale, P.E., Electrical Engineering, NC license number 042187. 20 years of infrastructure work behind the signature. Every word in the document defensible in a courtroom. Priya filed it with the Cabarrus County Building Inspections Department on January 23rd, attached to her legal notice of easement encroachment and demand for remediation. The county's response came in 48 hours. A building inspector named Gerald Tatum drove out to Crestwood Drive on January 25th. He spent 35 minutes at the shed. He had Marcus's assessment with him. Priya had confirmed it was in the file when the inspection was scheduled. The stop work order was posted on the shed's front panel at 2:17 p.m., directly below the HOA plaque. The notice of violation was issued simultaneously, a formal county document citing each of the 6 findings from Marcus's assessment by section reference, with a compliance deadline of 30 days for remediation or removal. Diane Pruitt called Gerald Tatum's supervisor that afternoon. She called the county commissioner she had known for 11 years the following morning, a man named Robert Hicks, who had attended 2 Crestwood Ridge community events, and who Diane had cited in board meeting minutes as a community supporter on 3 separate occasions. Commissioner Hicks called the Building Inspections Department. Gerald Tatum's supervisor called Priya to inform her of the contact. Then the supervisor reviewed Marcus's engineering assessment personally. Then he called Commissioner Hicks back. The stop work order was not lifted. The notice of violation stood. Commissioner Hicks did not call Diane back that day. The HOA's insurance carrier received Priya's notification letter on January 27th. The letter described the situation with the precision Priya applies to everything: the unpermitted structure, the private recorded easement, the 6 code violations in the engineering assessment, the stop work order, the notice of violation, and the pending civil action. The carrier's response arrived 5 business days later, a coverage reservation letter, 3 pages, from their legal department in Raleigh. A coverage reservation letter is not a denial. It is an insurance carrier's formal declaration that they are reviewing whether coverage applies and are reserving their right to deny it. In practice, it means the carrier has read the file and has seen enough to be concerned. The letter identified 3 coverage questions the carrier intended to investigate: whether Diane's actions fell within the scope of her authorized board authority, whether the unpermitted construction constituted a known code violation that voided coverage under the policy's compliance exclusion, and whether the easement encroachment, a trespass on private recorded property, triggered the policy's intentional act exclusion. The intentional act exclusion was the one that mattered. Insurance policies do not cover intentional trespasses. Building a permanent structure on someone else's recorded easement, after 2 board members had objected and cited the easement by name, and after a third had resigned in writing over the decision, is difficult to characterize as anything other than intentional. The 3 remaining board members, Gary Fenn, Patricia Sulo, and a first-year member named Derek Cho, who had joined the board 8 months earlier to help with the community newsletter and had not anticipated any of this, called an emergency session on February 1st. Diane attended. She told them the stop work order would be resolved. The insurance letter was routine, and the situation was manageable. She had spoken with Roy Callahan. He was prepared to pull the permits retroactively and bring the installation into compliance. Patricia Sulo, who had 20 years of residential real estate experience before her retirement, looked at Diane across the board table. Can you pull a permit retroactively for a structure built on a private easement without owner consent? Diane said she believed the permitting process could be completed. Patricia said, "That's not what I asked." The meeting ended without resolution. Gary Fenn called Priya's office the following morning. He did not identify himself as calling on behalf of the board. He called as a Crestwood Ridge homeowner who wanted to understand, privately, what the association's actual exposure looked like. Priya told him. He was quiet for a long moment. "She told us it was handled," he said. "Mr. Fenn," Priya said, "a 150-kilowatt commercial generator was built without permits on a private recorded easement by an unlicensed electrical subcontractor. A professional engineer has documented 6 active code violations. The county has issued a stop work order and a notice of violation. The insurance carrier has sent a coverage reservation letter." She paused. "It is not handled." Priya filed the subpoena for the HOA's internal records on February 3rd. The subpoena covered 12 months of board meeting minutes, all board communications related to the generator project, all contractor correspondence, and all financial records related to the $38,400 expenditure. The Crestwood Ridge Community Association's bylaws required the board to maintain minutes and financial records, and to make them available upon legal demand. The records existed. They were organized. Diane ran a tight administrative operation, whatever else could be said about her, and they arrived in Priya's office in a banker's box on February 11th. Priya called me that afternoon. "Marcus, I have the board minutes." "What do they say?" "They say she knew exactly what she was doing." The generator project appeared for the first time in the August 12, 2024 board meeting minutes. Agenda Item 4, Community Infrastructure, Emergency Power Proposal. Diane had presented the project in full, the engineering assessment she had commissioned from a Cabarrus County contractor, the proposed placement at 114 Crestwood Drive, the budget estimate, the timeline. She had framed it as a response to the November 2023 ice storm outages, a legitimate community vulnerability she had identified and was proposing to address through a capital infrastructure investment. The minutes recorded 2 responses. Carol Eames. The proposed location is on the recorded private driveway easement for 114 Crestwood Drive. That easement belongs to the homeowner, not the association. We cannot place a permanent structure on private recorded property without the owner's written consent. Tom Braddock. I agree with Carol. The easement at 114 is in the county deed. I looked it up this morning. We have no authority over that land. The placement needs to move to common area. Diane's response, as recorded in the minutes. I've reviewed the governing documents. Article 7, Section 2 of our bylaws grants the board authority to place community infrastructure in locations determined by the board to serve the community's interest. The engineering assessment identifies the 114 location as the optimal placement. I'm satisfied we have the authority to proceed. Carol Eames. Article 7, Section 2 says, within common areas and association-maintained properties, the driveway easement at 114 is neither. The minutes recorded no response from Diane to Carol's clarification. The item had been tabled for the following month. The September 9th board meeting minutes. Agenda Item 3, Community Infrastructure, Emergency Power Proposal, continued. Diane had returned with the same proposal, the same placement, and an updated contractor quote. The minutes recorded that she had opened the item by stating that she had consulted with the association's governing documents further and remained satisfied that the board had the authority to proceed under Article 7, Section 2. Tom Braddock had brought a printed copy of Article 7, Section 2 to the meeting. His objection, as recorded. I have the bylaw in front of me. It reads, "The Board of Directors shall have authority to install, maintain, and improve community infrastructure within the common areas and association-maintained properties of the Crestwood Ridge Community Association." The key phrase is, within the common areas and association-maintained properties. The driveway easement at 114 Crestwood Drive is not a common area. It is not an association-maintained property. It is private land recorded in the county deed to the individual homeowner. This bylaw does not authorize what you are proposing. Diane's response. The board has broad authority to act in the community's interest. I'm satisfied the placement is appropriate. Carol Eames. Diane, you are proposing to build a private structure on a private citizen's property without their knowledge or consent, citing a bylaw that explicitly says we have authority over common areas. That is not a broad interpretation. That is a misreading. Diane, I've reviewed this with the project engineer. We're moving forward. The item had not been tabled this time. It had been called to a vote. Diane, yes. Tom Braddock, no. Carol Eames, no. Gary Fenn, yes. Patricia Sulo, abstain. 3 members present, 2 yes votes, 2 no votes, 1 abstention. Diane had recorded the vote as a majority approval and noted the item as passed. Priya looked up from the minutes when she read me this section. A 2-to-2 split with 1 abstention, she said. She recorded it as a majority approval because she counted the abstention as a non-vote, counted herself, and declared a majority of votes cast, which is not how Robert's Rules works and not how the association's voting procedures work. Their bylaws require a majority of board members present, not a majority of votes cast. 5 members present, majority required, 3. She had 2. She failed the vote, I said. She failed the vote and recorded it as a pass. Priya paused. And then she scheduled the contractor. Carol Eames's resignation letter was in the file, dated September 16, 2024, 1 week after the board meeting where the failed vote had been recorded as an approval. It was 2 paragraphs. Carol was not a person who used more words than necessary. Dear board members and association membership, I am resigning from the Crestwood Ridge Community Association Board of Directors, effective immediately. The board, under President Pruitt's direction, is proceeding with the construction of a permanent structure on the private recorded driveway easement of 114 Crestwood Drive, without the property owner's knowledge or consent, without legal authority under any provision of the association's governing documents, and without building permits. I raised these objections at 2 consecutive board meetings. They were not addressed. The vote authorizing the project did not achieve the required majority under the association's bylaws and was incorrectly recorded as approved. I will not be part of this decision. Carol Eames. Diane had received the letter, noted the resignation in the minutes as Carol Eames has stepped down from the board effective September 16th, and had contacted Roy Callahan at Callahan General Contracting the following week to confirm the construction timeline. The concrete was poured on October 28th, 6 weeks after Carol's resignation letter, 5 weeks after the failed board vote that Diane had recorded as an approval, 4 weeks before I landed at Charlotte Douglas. The financial records were, in some ways, the most deliberate thing in the box. The Crestwood Ridge Community Association bylaws, Article 11, Section 3, required a full membership vote for any capital expenditure exceeding $25,000. The requirement existed specifically to prevent the board from making large, unilateral financial decisions without homeowner awareness. 200 households paying HOA dues had a right to know when $25,000 or more of their reserves was being committed to a capital project. The Callahan General Contracting invoice totaled $38,400. It should have triggered a membership vote, notices to all 200 homeowners, a meeting, a presentation, an opportunity for the community to weigh in on a $38,400 commitment of their shared reserves. None of that happened. Instead, The $38,400 invoice appeared in the HOA's financial records as 4 separate line items across 2 payment dates. October 15th, site preparation and foundation work, $9,800. October 15th, structural materials and installation, $9,750. November 8th, electrical integration services, $9,600. November 8th, equipment commissioning and finalization, $9,250. 4 line items, each one below $10,000. Each one within Diane's unilateral presidential spending authority, which the bylaws capped at $10,000 per approved line item for routine maintenance and operational expenses. The total, $38,400. Split into 4 pieces that each cleared the authorization threshold by a margin narrow enough to be intentional. Priya had a construction finance attorney review the invoice structure. His assessment: the line items as described do not reflect how construction projects are invoiced. Foundation work and structural installation are not separated from equipment commissioning and standard contractor billing. They are phases of a single project, invoiced as such. The 4-item split had no basis in Callahan's actual project cost structure. It was an administrative division of a single invoice into 4 pieces sized to avoid the membership vote requirement. Diane had not stumbled into a financial irregularity. She had engineered one. What Diane told the remaining board in the February 1st emergency session, the account she gave Gary Fenn, Patricia Solo, and Derek Cho when they sat across from her and asked how it had come to this, was built around one central argument. Marcus Hale had not responded. She had sent 2 email notices to his HOA registered email address, one in September, one in October, informing him of the proposed generator project and requesting his response regarding the easement placement. He had not replied to either. She had interpreted that silence as constructive abandonment of his HOA participation rights. An owner who cannot be reached, who has been abroad for 18 months without maintaining contact with his association, had forfeited his standing to object to a community infrastructure decision made in his absence. Patricia Sulo: did you check the county deed to confirm his ownership status? Diane: his contact information was on file. Did you check the deed? Diane did not answer. Did you check the county tax records? Silence. Marcus Hale had paid his Cabarrus County property taxes on October 11, 2024, 17 days before the concrete was poured on his driveway. The payment had been made online from his Qatar LNG contract accommodation on a Friday afternoon between a site inspection and a project review meeting. He had logged into the county tax portal, confirmed the assessed value, and paid the annual bill the way he paid it every year, without ceremony, without incident, as the routine maintenance of ownership. His name was on the deed. His payment was in the county tax record. His mailing address, his Charlotte address, held by his sister Sylvia, was on file with the county assessor's office. The only record Diane had checked was his HOA email inbox. She had sent 2 emails to an address he wasn't monitoring during an overseas work contract. He hadn't replied. She had decided, on the basis of 2 unanswered emails, that she had permission to build a permanent structure on his recorded private property. She had not called, had not sent a certified letter to his address of record, had not contacted the county to verify ownership or occupancy status, had not contacted Dale. There was no Dale in this story, no property manager, just a sister collecting mail who hadn't known to object. She had used silence as permission, and she had used it to build something she had been told twice, by 2 board members, in 2 recorded meetings, that she had no legal authority to build. Gary Fenn looked at the board table for a long moment after Patricia finished questioning Diane. Then he looked at Diane. Carol told you in writing that this was wrong, he said. Tom told you in 2 meetings. You failed the vote and recorded it as a pass. You split a $38,000 invoice to avoid a membership vote, and you built it anyway. Diane said, I was acting in the community's interest. Gary said nothing. He called Priya's office the next morning. The county's formal enforcement order arrived on February 19th. It was a 4-page document from the Cabarrus County Building Inspections Department, signed by the department director, and copied to the Crestwood Ridge Community Association, the property owner of record at 114 Crestwood Drive, and the Cabarrus County Attorney's Office. The order cited each of the 6 violations from Marcus's engineering assessment by code reference, noted the stop work order, posted January 25th, and stated the county's determination. The structure at 114 Crestwood Drive could not be brought into compliance through retroactive permitting. The easement violation, a permanent structure on a private recorded easement without owner consent, was not a permitting deficiency that could be remediated by filing paperwork. It was a legal encroachment on private property that required physical removal regardless of what permits might subsequently be obtained. The county's position: the structure had to come down, the generator had to come out, the concrete pad had to be broken up and removed. The easement had to be restored to its recorded condition. Deadline for voluntary compliance: 30 days. After 30 days, the county would arrange removal at the association's expense and bill accordingly. Roy Callahan, when reached by the county inspector's office, confirmed that he would not be returning to perform the removal work. His lawyer had advised him, given the pending licensing board action, to have no further involvement with the project. The HOA's new emergency contractor, a demolition and equipment removal company out of Concord that Patricia Sulo had sourced through a contact in her real estate network, scheduled the removal for February 26th. The removal required a crane truck. A 150-kilowatt commercial generator weighs approximately 4,800 pounds without the base frame, closer to 6,200 pounds with the steel skid mount it was bolted to inside the shed. You do not remove a 6,200-pound piece of equipment with a pickup and a hand truck. You remove it with a crane-equipped flatbed, a 40-foot heavy equipment transport with a hydraulic knuckle boom crane rated for the lift, a certified rigger, and a clear access path wide enough and geometrically simple enough for a vehicle of that size to navigate. The demolition contractor's project manager, a man named Steve Garrett, who had been doing equipment removal and demolition work in Cabarrus and Rowan counties for 16 years, drove the route on February 24th, 2 days before the scheduled removal. He turned onto Crestwood Drive from the main road and immediately saw the problem. The Crestwood Ridge development entrance had been redesigned 2 years earlier as part of a landscaping enhancement project Diane had approved and championed. New monument signage, upgraded plantings, repaved entry apron, and as part of the sightline improvement for the new monument sign, a stone-faced structure bearing the Crestwood Ridge name in raised bronze letters, a Duke Energy utility pole that had stood at the entrance's eastern edge since the development was built, had been relocated 6 feet closer to the road. The pole relocation had improved the monument sign's visibility from the main road. It had also reduced the effective entry clearance at the Crestwood Drive entrance curve. The combination of the pole's new position, the curve geometry, and the monument sign's stone base on the opposite side, to 11 feet and 4 inches at the tightest point of the turn. Steve Garrett's crane truck required 13 feet 2 inches of clearance to make the turn. He sat in his truck at the entrance for a few minutes, measuring with a laser distance tool, running the geometry. Then he called the HOA's contact number, Patricia Sulo, who had taken over as the board's primary operational contact after Gary Fenn had made clear he was not going to be the person dealing with contractors on this project. Ms. Sulo, the crane truck can't make the entrance turn. I need 11 feet 4. I need 13.2. That's not a close miss. That's a hard stop. I cannot get the truck into the development from the front. Patricia, is there another way in? Steve drove the development perimeter. On the eastern boundary of Crestwood Ridge, behind the last row of homes on the development's far side, there was a rear service path, a gravel track 12 feet wide, that had been established during the development's original construction for utility access and had remained on the survey as an informal service corridor. It ran along the development's eastern boundary fence for approximately 800 feet before it dead-ended. It dead-ended because the land it dead-ended at was not HOA common land. It was Marcus Hale's property. The rear service path, to connect with the shed's location at the front of the development, had to cross the rear section of 114 Crestwood Drive, a strip of land along the property's back boundary that Marcus owned in fee simple, clear title, no easement, no shared use, his land. The survey was unambiguous. The crane truck could reach the generator shed from the rear of the development, but only if it crossed Marcus Hale's property to do so. Steve called Patricia back. There's a rear path on the eastern boundary. It gets me close, but it dead ends at private property, the same homeowner whose easement the shed is on. I need his permission to cross. Patricia was quiet for a moment. I'll call the board, she said. The board called Diane. This was not a call any of the 3 remaining members wanted to make. Gary Fenn, Patricia Sulo, and Derek Cho had spent the 3 weeks since the emergency session navigating the gap between their legal obligation to manage the association's affairs and their personal desire to have no further involvement with a situation Diane had created and they had inherited. But the removal was in 4 days. The crane truck couldn't get in from the front, and the only path to completing the court-ordered removal ran through Marcus Hale's back property. Someone had to ask him. Diane said she would go. There was a brief, wordless exchange among the 3 board members on the call, the kind of communication that happens between people who have been through enough together to say things without saying them. Gary: Diane, you understand what you're asking him. Diane: I'll handle it. She came to my door on the afternoon of February 24th. I heard the car in my driveway. The restored front section I was using while the easement remained occupied. At 2:43 p.m. I was at the kitchen table reviewing the civil suit filings Priya had sent over. I had been expecting this contact in some form since Steve Garrett had called Priya that morning to explain the access problem. Priya had called me immediately after. She's going to need to ask you, Priya had said. I know. Marcus, you don't have to grant it. The county can pursue the removal through a separate enforcement process. It will take longer, and the HOA will bear additional costs, but you are under no legal obligation to provide access. I know that too, I said. I went to the door when she knocked. Diane Pruitt on my front porch, composed, as she always was. The composure that had been her register in every interaction, the bearing of someone who had run a 200-unit community for 12 years and had learned to present certainty as her default state. She looked at me. I waited. She explained the situation, the crane truck clearance, the utility pole she had relocated, the rear service path, the need to cross the back of my property to complete the removal. She presented it cleanly and without embellishment, which I noted. She was not, in this moment, pretending the situation was other than what it was. When she finished, I said one thing. Did you ask my permission before you poured the concrete? She held my gaze. She did not answer. I said, I'll grant access, my terms. Priya will have the document ready in 2 hours. You sign it before the truck crosses my property line. Priya had the temporary access and liability agreement drafted by 5 p.m., 2 pages. The language was precise because it needed to be. This was not a courtesy document but a legal instrument, and every clause existed for a specific reason. Section 1. Access Authorization. Marcus Hale, owner of record of 114 Crestwood Drive, Cabarrus County, North Carolina, hereby grants a one-time temporary right of access to the rear parcel of the above property to the Crestwood Ridge Community Association and its designated removal contractors for the sole purpose of accessing and removing the generator installation currently located on the driveway easement at the same address. Access is granted for a period not to exceed 2 consecutive days, beginning February 26, 2026. Access is granted on the express conditions stated in this agreement and for no other purpose. Section 2. Acknowledgement of unauthorized construction. The Crestwood Ridge Community Association, acting through its president Diane Pruitt, hereby acknowledges that the generator shed installed at 114 Crestwood Drive in October and November 2024 was constructed on a private recorded driveway easement belonging to Marcus Hale without his knowledge, without his authorization, and without any legal authority under the association's governing documents or any applicable North Carolina statute. This acknowledgement is made voluntarily and constitutes a binding admission for purposes of any pending or future civil or administrative proceeding. Section 3. Liability and Indemnification. The Crestwood Ridge Community Association accepts full financial responsibility for any damage to the property of Marcus Hale caused during the access period, including, but not limited to, damage to landscaping, grading, fencing, or any surface improvement on the rear parcel. The association waives any claim to offset or contribution from Marcus Hale for any costs associated with the generator installation, removal, or restoration. Section 4. Waiver of future claims. The association waives all future claims, counterclaims, or defenses related to the generator project, the easement encroachment, the removal process, or any cost incurred in connection with the foregoing. Diane came to Priya's office the following morning with her personal attorney. Her attorney read the document. Flagged Section 2, the acknowledgement of unauthorized construction, asked whether the language could be softened to reflect a good faith dispute rather than an unqualified admission. Priya: no. Her attorney conferred with Diane in the hallway for 11 minutes. They came back in. Diane sat down. She read the document herself, from the beginning, all 2 pages. She read it the way you read something when you are looking for a way out, and are slowly understanding there isn't one. She picked up the pen. She signed it. The crane truck came through Marcus's rear property at 7:15 a.m. on February 26th. Steve Garrett had flagged the access path, confirmed the ground clearance, and positioned 2 ground crew members at the property boundary to guide the truck across the rear strip without damaging the fence line or the surface grade. The truck crossed Marcus's property in 40 seconds. It took the removal crew 4 hours to dismantle the shed structure, rig the generator, lift it clear of the concrete pad, load it onto the flatbed, and run the demo crew in behind to begin breaking up the pad. Marcus stood on his back porch and watched. The generator came up on the crane hook at 9:47 a.m., the 6,200-pound unit rising off its vibration mounts, clearing the shed frame, swinging wide over the pad, and settling onto the flatbed's deck. The rigger called it clear. The crane operator secured the load. The HOA plaque, Crestwood Ridge Community Association, Emergency Power Infrastructure. Phase 1, installed November 2024, was still mounted on the shed's front panel when the demo crew took the structure apart. One of the crew members set it against the fence post at the edge of Marcus's property when they cleared the site. It sat there through the rest of the demolition day. Marcus looked at it once from the porch. Then he went inside. The generator came out the way it went in, on someone else's terms. Priya filed the criminal referral with the Cabarrus County District Attorney's Office on March 3rd. It was 38 pages. The board meeting minutes, the failed vote recorded as an approval, Carol Eames's resignation letter, the financial records showing the invoice split, the permit records showing nothing, Marcus's engineering assessment, the county stop work order and notice of violation, the signed temporary access agreement with its acknowledgement of unauthorized construction. Every document in sequence, every fact sourced, the narrative assembled the way you assemble it when you want it to hold up under the hardest scrutiny a DA's office will apply. 3 charges sought. The first, unauthorized construction on a private recorded easement. Willful trespass by permanent encroachment. North Carolina General Statute 14-134 covers willful trespass on the lands of another. The installation of a permanent structure, a poured concrete pad, a steel frame shed, a 150 kilowatt generator on a utility-connected foundation, on a private recorded easement without the owner's knowledge or consent, is not a technical trespass. It is a willful one. The board minutes established that Diane had been told, by 2 members in 2 recorded meetings, that the easement was private property and the HOA had no authority over it. She had proceeded anyway. The willfulness was documented in her own records. The second, misrepresentation of HOA authority to obtain contractor services, obtaining property by false pretense under North Carolina General Statute 14-100. Diane had presented Roy Callahan with a project authorization, representing that the board had approved the construction under Article 7, Section 2 of the HOA bylaws. The board had not approved it. The vote had failed to reach the required majority. Article 7, Section 2 did not cover the location. The authorization Diane had presented to Callahan was a false representation of legal authority, used to obtain $38,400 in construction services. The third, misappropriation of HOA funds. The $38,400 capital expenditure had required a full membership vote under Article 11, Section 3 of the association's bylaws. No membership vote had been held. The expenditure had been approved through a structured invoice split. 4 line items, each below the $10,000 presidential spending cap, totaling $38,400, designed to avoid the membership authorization threshold. The structuring was deliberate. The financial records showed it plainly. The DA's office assigned the referral to an investigator on March 7th. Priya filed a separate referral with the North Carolina Licensing Board for general contractors on March 3rd, the same day as the criminal referral, because the contractor's conduct was a separate matter requiring a separate process. Roy Callahan held a Cabarrus County General Contractor's license, number GC-04817, current and in good standing at the time he took Diane's project. He had been licensed since 2009 and had operated Callahan General Contracting without a formal disciplinary action in 15 years of practice. The referral cited 3 grounds: unpermitted construction of a permanent structure. A licensed general contractor in North Carolina is required by statute to ensure that all work performed under their license has the required permits before construction begins. Roy Callahan had begun and completed the construction of a permanent structure, foundation, framing, mechanical connections, without pulling a single permit. He had either not inquired about permits or had known they weren't pulled and built anyway. Neither is a defense. Unlicensed subcontractor used for gas line and electrical work. The project file Callahan had provided to the county showed that the gas line connection and the electrical panel integration had been performed by B&T Electrical Services, a company that held no current or prior electrical contractor's license in North Carolina. A licensed general contractor is responsible for verifying that all subcontractors working under their project hold the required licenses for their scope of work. Callahan had either not verified B&T's license status or had knowingly used an unlicensed subcontractor. The work B&T had performed, live electrical panel integration and natural gas line connection, was precisely the work the licensing requirement was designed to ensure was done by qualified, accountable professionals. Falsified project completion certificate. Callahan had submitted a project completion certificate to the HOA upon invoice, a standard industry document attesting that the work had been completed in conformance with applicable codes and regulations. The certificate bore his license number and his signature. It attested to code compliance on a project with 6 documented violations that had never been inspected by any authority. The licensing board acknowledged receipt on March 12th and opened a formal investigation. Roy Callahan's license was suspended pending the investigation's outcome, a standard board action when the referral involves public safety concerns, which an unpermitted gas line connection and an unlicensed electrical panel integration qualify as without debate. The unlicensed subcontractor, B&T Electrical Services, operated by a man named Brian Tatum out of a Rowan County address, was referred to the Cabarrus County Building Inspections Department and the NC Electrical Contractors Licensing Board for separate action. Callahan called Priya's office on March 15th through his attorney. He wanted to discuss cooperation in exchange for a licensing board letter of support from the complainant. Priya told his attorney she would pass along the request. She passed it along to Marcus. Marcus said, "Tell him to cooperate with the DA's office. That's the cooperation that counts." The civil suit was filed in Cabarrus County Superior Court on March 5th. The demand was precise and fully documented, every figure supported by an independent professional assessment, every category grounded in comparable North Carolina case law that Priya had assembled over the 3 weeks between the criminal referral and the civil filing. Easement restoration and concrete pad removal, $14,200. The licensed demolition contractor's itemized invoice for the February 26th removal, crane truck, rigging crew, demolition labor, concrete breaking and haul away, grading and compaction of the exposed easement surface, every line item with a receipt. Property damage, easement marker burial, wall conduit damage, surface grading disruption, $6,800. A licensed property inspector's assessment of the damage to the recorded easement boundary marker, buried under the concrete pad's poured edge and requiring a licensed surveyor to reestablish. The exterior wall damage from the improperly mounted electrical conduit, and the surface grade disruption to the easement approach that had resulted from 18 months of equipment vibration transmitted through the concrete pad into the surrounding soil. 18 months of lost driveway and garage access, $18,000. A documented inconvenience rate calculated from the construction date, October 28, 2024, through the removal date, February 26, 2026, at a rate established by comparable North Carolina property access loss cases. Marcus had parked on the street for 18 months. His two-car garage had been inaccessible. The documented rate was conservative by the comparable case standard. Diminished property value during the encroachment period, $22,000. A licensed Cabarrus County appraiser's assessment of the reduction in 114 Crestwood Drive's market value during the period an unpermitted commercial structure occupied the recorded driveway easement. The appraiser had used 3 comparable Crestwood Ridge sales from the same period, properties without encumbrances, and applied a documented discount rate for the recorded easement violation and the active county notice of violation. Emotional distress, $55,000. 3 comparable North Carolina Superior Court judgments involving unlawful permanent encroachment on residential property, where courts had awarded emotional distress damages to homeowners who had returned to find their property altered without consent. The specific harm, returning from an 18-month overseas work contract to find a permanent structure with another organization's name on it occupying your recorded private driveway. The violation of the specific security a person places in the unencumbered ownership of their home. Punitive damages, $110,000. The multiplier applied to the willful and premeditated nature of the encroachment. North Carolina's punitive damages standard requires proof of fraud, malice, or willful or wanton conduct. Diane had been told by 2 board members, in 2 recorded meetings, that the easement was private property, and the HOA had no authority. She had overruled them. She had recorded a failed vote as an approval. She had structured the invoice to avoid a membership vote. She had proceeded after a board member resigned in writing over the decision. Priya cited all 5 facts in the punitive damages section and noted that any one of them alone would satisfy the willfulness standard. Total demand, $226,000 plus attorney fees. The HOA's insurance carrier formal denial letter arrived on March 8th, 5 pages from the Raleigh legal team. The coverage reservation letter from February had been the preliminary warning. This was the determination. Coverage denied on 3 independent grounds. First, Diane's actions fell outside the scope of her authorized board authority. The HOA's directors and officers policy covered board members acting within the authority granted by the association's governing documents. Article 7, Section 2 did not authorize action on private non-common area property. The board vote authorizing the project had not achieved the required majority. Diane had acted outside her authority. The policy did not cover that. Second, the unpermitted construction triggered the policy's code compliance exclusion. The policy excluded coverage for claims arising from construction that knowingly violated applicable building codes and permit requirements. A licensed contractor had built a permanent structure with no permits of any kind. The code compliance exclusion applied. Third, the easement encroachment triggered the intentional act exclusion. The policy excluded coverage for intentional trespasses on third-party property. The board minutes, now part of the public court record, documented that Diane had been told the easement was private property, had been told the HOA had no authority over it, and had proceeded anyway. The intentional act exclusion applied, all 3 grounds independently. The carrier was denying coverage 3 times over. The $38,400 construction cost, uninsured HOA liability. The $11,200 removal cost, crane truck, demolition crew, concrete haul-away, site grading, uninsured HOA liability. Total uninsured HOA exposure from the project, $49,600 before the civil judgment. The board met on March 14th and voted to issue a special assessment notice to all 200 Crestwood Ridge homeowners, $248 per household. The notice went out by mail and email on March 16th. The neighborhood read the special assessment notice on a Tuesday. By Thursday, they had also read the board meeting minutes. Priya's civil filing was a public court record. The board meeting minutes were attached as Exhibit C. Carol Eames's resignation letter was Exhibit D. The financial records showing the invoice split were Exhibit F. All of it public. All of it accessible to anyone with a Cabarrus County Court Records login. All of it being forwarded in a Crestwood Ridge community email thread that had started with someone asking what the $248 assessment was for and had evolved, over 48 hours, into something else entirely. 200 households had paid their HOA dues on time, every quarter, trusting that the reserves they contributed were being managed according to the rules they had all agreed to. They read Carol Eames's resignation letter, the 2 clean paragraphs, the specific naming of their neighbor's address, the statement that she would not be part of the decision, and understood that someone had tried to stop this and had been overruled. They read the board meeting minutes and saw Tom Braddock reading Article 7, Section 2, aloud at a board table, and being told by the president that her interpretation superseded the text. They read the invoice split, 4 line items, each below $10,000, totaling $38,400, and understood what it meant without needing Priya to explain it. Gary Fenn received 41 emails and 11 phone calls in the 3 days after the assessment notice went out. Patricia Sullo received 37. Derek Cho received 19 and sent Gary a text that said simply, "I joined the board to help with the newsletter." A petition for an emergency membership meeting was circulating by Friday. It reached the required 30% threshold, 60 homeowner signatures, by Sunday afternoon. Diane received a formal notice of the emergency membership meeting on Monday, March 23rd. She called Gary Fenn. He did not answer. The emergency membership meeting was held on April 1st. The Crestwood Ridge Community Center, the same building whose common electrical panel had been connected to Marcus's driveway for 4 months, seated 140. By 6:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the meeting was called to order, every seat was taken, and there were people standing along the back wall. Gary Fenn had estimated 90 attendees when he booked the room. He had estimated wrong. The petition had gathered 67 signatures. The room had 158 people in it. Diane was present. She sat in the front row to the left of the board table, the seat she had occupied at every community meeting for 12 years. With the composed bearing she had maintained through everything, the composure that had been her register from the first board meeting, where Carol Eames had told her the easement was private property, through the February morning she had stood on Marcus's porch and asked to cross his land, through the criminal referral and the civil filing and the insurance denial and the special assessment notice. It was, Marcus had come to understand, not a performance. It was structural, the deep composure of someone who had been right about enough things, for long enough, that they had lost the capacity to fully process being wrong. Gary Fenn called the meeting to order at 7:02 p.m. The agenda had one item. The removal vote under the Crestwood Ridge Community Association bylaws required a 2/3 majority of members present and voting. With 158 members in the room, a number that itself represented a remarkable community mobilization for a Tuesday evening HOA meeting, the threshold was 106 votes. Gary read the motion into the record, the removal of Diane Pruitt from the position of president of the Crestwood Ridge Community Association Board of Directors, effective immediately, pursuant to Article 6, Section 8 of the association's bylaws governing removal of officers for cause. He opened the floor for statements. 11 people spoke. Marcus was not one of them. He was not a person who speaks at community meetings when the relevant facts are already in the court record. He sat in the third row and listened. A woman named Renee Hollis, who had lived in Crestwood Ridge for 9 years and had served on the landscaping committee for 4 of them, said, "I trusted that when I paid my dues, they were being used for things the board was authorized to spend them on. I did not consent to $38,000 of my money being used to build an unpermitted structure on my neighbor's driveway." A man named Paul Detmer, who had bought his Crestwood Ridge home 18 months earlier and was attending his first community meeting, said, "I bought here because the HOA had a good reputation. I'd like to know how we make sure this doesn't happen again." Tom Braddock spoke fifth. He had been on the board for 4 years. He had objected in 2 recorded meetings, voted no when the vote was called, and had been overruled by a president who recorded his no vote as a pass. He stood up and said what he had said at the September board meeting, the same words, in the same sequence, with the same Article 7 text in his hand. "Within the common areas and association-maintained properties," he read. 5 words. The bylaw says 5 words that tell you exactly where the board's authority ends. She ignored 5 words and built on a man's private driveway. He sat down. Diane was offered the floor. She stood and delivered a prepared statement. 3 minutes, composed. The same community safety argument she had been making since January. The ice storms, the vulnerability, the community's interest, the owner's absence. her obligation as president to act in the community's best interest when circumstances required it. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then Gary called the vote. The ballots were paper, folded slips collected in a box that Derek Cho, performing his final act of board service, carried through the rows. The count took 11 minutes. Gary Fenn read the result into the microphone. 134 to 2. The room received it without drama, not a cheer, not a gasp. The specific quiet of a community that had already processed its anger over the preceding 2 weeks, and was now simply completing the formal act that the processing had made inevitable. Diane sat in the front row and received the number without visible response. 134 to 2, on a 2/3 threshold of 106. She had lost by 28 votes, more than she needed to. Tom Braddock nominated Carol Eames from the floor before Gary had finished closing the removal motion. Carol was in the room. She had come, Marcus noticed, not to the front but to the middle, 4 rows back, in the specific position of someone who had not assumed she would be needed at the front, but had wanted to be present for what happened. The nomination was seconded by 6 people simultaneously. Gary called the confirmation vote. It was by show of hands. Every hand in the room went up, except 2. Carol Eames walked to the front of the room, shook Gary Fenn's hand, and sat in the board president's chair for the first time. Her first act. She moved to adjourn the meeting and schedule a full governance review session for the following month, at which the board would present the membership with a proposed set of bylaw amendments, closing the authorization gaps Diane's tenure had exposed. The motion passed unanimously. The DA filed charges on April 14th. 2 counts: misrepresentation of HOA authority to obtain contractor services, and misappropriation of association funds through the structured invoice split. Diane's attorney negotiated through May. The criminal case against her was strong on the misappropriation count. The invoice structuring was documented in the HOA's own financial records. The bylaw requirement was unambiguous, and the structure of 4 sub-threshold payments, totaling $38,400, was difficult to characterize as anything other than deliberate. The misrepresentation charge, the false authority claim to Roy Callahan, was the one her attorney fought harder on. Callahan had cooperated with the DA's office in exchange for a licensing board recommendation, and his account of Diane's representations about board approval was detailed and consistent with the minutes. But the charge required proving that Diane had known the authorization was false when she presented it, and her attorney argued that her genuine belief in her own authority, however mistaken, undermined the knowledge element. The plea agreement was filed on May 28th. Diane pleaded guilty to a single misdemeanor count of misappropriation of association funds. Sentence: 12 months probation, an $8,000 fine payable to the county, and mandatory restitution to the Crestwood Ridge Community Association for the full $38,400 construction cost. Every dollar of the HOA funds spent on the project returned to the reserves from which it had been taken without authorization. The restitution schedule was structured over 18 months. She would be paying for the generator shed that no longer existed until the following fall. The civil judgment was entered in Cabarrus County Superior Court on June 17th. Judge Patricia Holloway presided. The case had not gone to a full jury trial. Diane's personal attorney had attempted a settlement negotiation in late May, after the criminal plea, that had offered $140,000 in full resolution. Priya had rejected it and presented Marcus's position. The documented demand, fully supported, or the judgment. Judge Holloway had reviewed the complete record and entered summary judgment on the liability counts, with a damages hearing in June. The judgment: $226,000. Diane Pruitt personally liable for the punitive damages component, $110,000. The willfulness finding: 5 documented acts of proceeding against explicit objection, supported the punitive award without extended argument. Judge Holloway noted in her written order that the board meeting minutes presented one of the cleaner records of documented willful disregard for property rights she had reviewed in a civil property case. The Crestwood Ridge Community Association, liable for the remaining $116,000, the easement restoration costs, property damage, access loss damages, and diminished value assessment. The HOA's liability was based on Diane's actions having been taken in her capacity as association president, using association resources and authority, making the association jointly responsible for the consequences, even where her actions had exceeded her authorized scope. Carol Eames, as incoming president, had already prepared the membership for the HOA's liability share, a structured levy, spread over 3 years, included in the quarterly dues adjustment, had been approved by the membership at the May governance meeting. No special assessment this time. A transparent, voted, properly authorized financial plan, the way it was supposed to work. Priya filed the judgment lien against Diane's Crestwood Ridge property the same afternoon the judgment was entered. It followed the property. She would not sell, refinance, or transfer her home without satisfying $110,000 first. The easement restoration was completed on July 9th. Court-ordered, HOA-funded, performed by a licensed grading and paving contractor that Carol Eames had selected through a competitive bid process. The first competitive bid the HOA had used for a contractor engagement in 4 years. The concrete pad had already been broken up and hauled away in February. What remained was the subsurface, the compacted gravel base, the grade disruption from 18 months of generator vibration, the disturbed soil at the pad's edges where the pour had encroached on the surrounding surface. The contractor spent 2 days grading, compacting, and laying a proper asphalt base coat and surface layer across the full 32-foot easement width. The licensed surveyor came on July 10th. He re-established the easement boundary marker, a new steel survey pin in a clean concrete collar, driven to county specification at the recorded boundary point. The marker that had been buried under Diane's concrete pad for 8 months, re-established in clean July light with a surveyor's rod and a fresh county filing. Marcus watched from the porch. When the surveyor finished and packed his equipment, Marcus walked down the driveway, his driveway, the full length of it, from the garage to the road, for the first time since January of the previous year. He opened the garage. He pulled his car in. He sat in the garage for a moment with the engine off and the door open, looking at the back wall of the space he had not been able to reach for 18 months. Then he got out, walked back to the porch, and called Sylvia. She came over that evening. They sat on the front porch as the July light went gold across the Piedmont foothills, the restored driveway in front of them, clean asphalt, clean easement line, the survey pin marker visible at the boundary point where the concrete pad's edge had been. Empty. His. Sylvia had a glass of iced tea. Marcus had coffee, because he always had coffee. She told people you'd abandoned the place, Sylvia said, after you left for Qatar. She was telling neighbors you'd probably sell. I know. Gary Fenn told me she used to walk Crestwood Drive in the evenings and look at your corner lot. Sylvia paused. He said she called it the best positioned property in the development. Marcus looked at the driveway. She wasn't wrong about that, he said. A pause. Sylvia. What made you so sure you'd win? Marcus was quiet for a moment. He looked at the easement line, the survey pin, the clean boundary where the concrete had been. She built an unpermitted generator shed on a recorded easement, he said. Didn't pull a single permit. Structured the invoices to hide it from her own membership. Built it after 2 board members told her in writing she had no authority. He paused. And then she needed my property to remove it. Sylvia waited. I've been doing this for 20 years, he said. Permitting, inspection, compliance, certification. I've worked in 4 countries on infrastructure that can kill people if it's built wrong. The permit isn't paperwork. The permit is the record that someone looked at the work and confirmed it was done right. He looked at the survey pin. She built without permits because she didn't want anyone looking at what she was building. That's always true. In 20 years, every unpermitted installation I've ever seen. The reason there's no permit is because the builder knew it wouldn't pass. A long pause. You always need the permits, he said, and you always need them to be yours. The light went down across the Piedmont. The Crestwood Ridge monument sign was visible at the end of the street. The stone face, the bronze letters, the landscaping that had framed the utility pole relocation that had made the entrance too narrow for the crane truck. The street that had, for one February morning, belonged to someone else's problem. Marcus finished his coffee. He went inside.